Hi, welcome to Holland'44 Operation Market Garden review and after action chat that I usually do with these games, covering likes, dislikes, observations. Yeah, we've completed the short game scenario, which is up to turn 11 of 20, and it's been quite a defeat for the Allies. As you can see on the map there, they're not quite over the Swede-Williams Canal at Vagel, never mind anywhere near Arnhem. They needed to be north of Nijmegen to actually get a win, and so they're well off. But it's an enjoyable experience. Second time I've been through the game, and quite a lot I like about it. A few dislikes, and things I've kind of learned, particularly on the Allied side. The Allied side is it's a tougher one to play. I think quite considerable distance. I think, let's get on with what I want to talk about on the game. Sort of what did I like about the game? Well, the first thing is then you can see it's a one mapper. Now, I have played a few market garden games, particularly Old Hell's Highway, and the fact that this is actually on a one map is, I think, first time I've come across that. But it does encompass the whole battlefield. There's a lot of room for manoeuvre. Even though it's just on the single map. Not only that, but there's reinforcement schedules and turn phase markers and various other displays actually on the map as well. So you have it all there. It's just the player aid card, which is basically two-sided. And so it's very, very neat and concise as a game, which these kind of games can stretch out to a lot of territory, a lot of maps. The fact that it's been kept down to one is, I think, a big plus really for it. It'll fit on most tables, and certainly when soloing and stuff, it's easy to leave out and not disrupt everything around it just by its sheer size. So the one map, very big like from me on that. Another bit I like is the combat. It's the concept that the combat itself is fairly straightforward. It's a 1d6 combat results table done on odds. There are no modifiers, just shifts. So that can be a little bland sometimes, and these days there's some very intricate ways of doing combat. This is quite straightforward. However, the complexity comes in really after the combat roll, and what I like about it is it actually involves the defender in almost always in decision making after the combat roll. So, for example, the advance and retreat sort of sub game after the combat is quite intricate. The defender doesn't have to retreat unless forced to by further rolls on the determined defence table. So there's a possibility of trading the space loss for extra casualties, and or at least trying. And there's a variability depending on the terrain that the defender's in. City, it's almost roll of one, and it doesn't work. You still have to retreat, but other than that, it's particularly relevant, I think, for the airborne guys, because they are elite units, and they get a +1. So normally it'd be 1 or a 2 in a city. It's a 1 for them. So it's only 1 in 6 chance of one of these airborne units in a city like Arnhem having to retreat. So that's nicely fitted in, but it's relevant for certainly the Germans as well, who can take advantage of the determined defence, and seeing as throughout the game you're likely to have what is effectively more steps than the Allies to trade for a defence. It's very useful for them, and certainly been useful in the game I played. With that, there's the advance as well. So the advance after combat is variable depending on the combat result. One thing on the combat, though, it's interesting, is that there is no way to force more than one step loss on either the attacker or the defender. It's always a maximum one step loss. Now, with multi-step units, that means that there is some resilience in these units. The only really way to wipe out a unit that's not just one step is to surround it. So, but even then, you've got to be well surrounding it. So there's a possibility to retreat through one enemy zone of control, not a bond, but certainly a zone of control. It's the second that's the killer. And even in that case, you've got this determined defence and a desperation defence on top of that. So, there's a lot of variability of what actually happens in the combat, which doesn't necessarily have everything to do with the combat results table alone. So, I think that's certainly very good in this situation. At this scale, I think it works very well, and it involves the defender in the combat phase, where normally it's just a case of where do I retreat to if I do. Here there's decisions to be made on that. The zone of control ideas here are very good. This idea of a ZOC bond, so two units covering a hex so that you can't get through it, or a hex side so you can't infiltrate through. There is infiltrate possibilities, but not through these bonds, and particularly on the cities. And it looks like that's very relevant for the beginning in Arnhem to get the British to have a chance of getting to the bridge. But the ZOC bond idea allows you to almost have a picket of units to stop movement infiltration through, without having this completely hard ZOC idea. Even if you do have just one unit, you have a hard ZOC, but that bond is extra security, and I quite like that. The treatment of morale, it's very simple, but it does work really, really well. Most of the elite units in the game are the airborne units. So, but the morale bonus they get is on attacking, not on defending. So there's a trade-off. Certainly, when they go out of supply and their attacking is halved, that they have good capability to take ground initially, but I think if you overdo it, then they're going to suffer. However, that morale bonus does give you that shift, which even if it's up against some tough units, there's a way of a chance of getting through with that shift, and it's very difficult to counter that shift. The other thing is actually in defence, and this is quite part of this elegance, is that in defence you don't get the shift, but what you do is you get that +1 on the determined defence. So you can use that morale bonus, even though it's not affecting the dice roll. It is affecting the overall result of the combat, because you'll be able to activate that determined defence a lot better. With the green units, they're what they call low quality. So again, that's actually flipped. So that's a penalty to the opposition when they are defending. So they can attack just as well as any other unit, which is quite interesting. And that idea of the determined defence, the low quality units get a penalty rather than the bonus, like the elite. So if you like, the low quality actually affects the defence doubly, but doesn't actually affect the attack. And pretty much, I think it's certainly all the low quality units are all German ones, so they don't hang about. They can get easily pushed out of the way, and also cause losses against them with these step losses. However, if they gang up or if they have other units around them, they can be sort of a valuable part of an attack, and they can also take the casualties as well, from from an attack. So they're not, as is sometimes with low quality units in games, the player tries to kind of shove them out the way and give them the boring jobs. You don't have to do that in this game, particularly with the Germans. Once the airborne divisions are out of supply, you can be quite brave with them, and you can use them just as good as the other units. So they're not somehow diseased, if you see what I mean, which can happen in some games. So that morale treatment, even though it's just one shift one way, one shift another way, does actually come out in the game really well. It does actually affect the game in a quite an elegant way, and does do the job, if you see what I mean. The other interesting thing I think, which I like, is the artillery. Again, it's abstracted down, but not to a almost a non-existent or peripheral way. So effectively, what artillery units do is they will provide shifts in combat. So that's attacking combat. With what is really a quite a low range of disparity between the biggest units and the littlest units. We're talking about sort of 9 to 1, 9 being the toughest units, and 1 being the smallest units as far as combat value goes. That shift is actually quite valuable, along with the morale shift. And they do a job. The resupply of the artillery, particularly on the Allied side, is very interesting because of the limited amount of supply, and you've got to make decisions, and that's part of the turn on what you do with those. The other aspect of artillery, it's actually in defence. So it's unusual. Usually you'd expect a sort of defence artillery to do a shift in defence favour on the combat table. It doesn't actually work like that. It only actually operates as a modifier on the determined defence. So again, this extra sort of complication to combat, and extends it. So another defender's decision to be made. Interesting enough, of course, is that the defender would know the result before they want to put the artillery in or not. So quite interesting in that case. If the attack went wrong, badly, there was a bad roll, then you could save the artillery. So that's quite interesting. I quite like that idea. Not quite sure why, to be honest, but it's quite intriguing, and builds on that. The defender gets to do a lot of work within the opponent's turn. So that's artillery. Again, it is peripheral. It is quite abstract, but there's interesting nuances to it. The air power, again, is just kind of like a mobile artillery, depending on the weather, how many you get, and it's just a shift in attack, and it has to be with the British 30 core. Non-airborne forces. So, but that, interestingly enough, that's just another shift. Although it doesn't quite have the intricacy of artillery. interesting decisions to be made on artillery was actually with the resupply. So, with the exception of the Germans at night, there is only a restricted amount of resupply you can do. So, there's a decision to be made right at the start of a player turn, and that player says, what artillery should we flip back over? So, there's an element of planning there at the start of your turn, and also, as you're likely to be the defender in the other person's player turn, it's whether to preserve artillery for defence. I only really saw it useful with the airborne troops and some of the German units around the 101st area. So the artillery for the airborne, with the exception of first Airborne Division in Arnhem, you have to wait for it to arrive. And in my game, it took a long time. One of them actually it got eliminated on landing, so I didn't really see that scope. But that defensive stuff is interesting with the decision making and that restriction. It's quite a good game effect, I think. And my final like, and actually I do kind of like the game in total, but a specific thing that takes my fancy, if you like, would be the traffic markers. So this is a kind of little shell game that the German player gets to play. It's plonking these little markers down on the board to gum up the roadworks and slow down 30 core and slow down the progression of the relief. Again, it's very simple. I like the way that you only start with a few markers and you add one per turn as well. Not entirely in control because you don't know when they're going to come off the board. So if you have you can have a traffic marker which was very relevant 2 turns ago, but now is not very relevant at all, and you don't get to remove it, and you have to wait for the dice roll. So it's not entirely in the German player's control. They do get to select where to place, and you usually get 1 or 2. Well, you'll get 1 or 2 a turn to replace. Again, simple and quite elegant, and just again a peripheral thing to the game, but has real effects, and was at the end of the German turn. Usually the German turn tends to be sort of patching holes and things like that. To be able to stick down what are effective sort of almost offensive markers in their activity, you can actually do something to hurt the allied player at the end of your turn, or at least annoy them, which if you'd taken a beating that previous turn was quite a relief. I think it's quite good for the German player psychology, the traffic markers as well. I mean, they're not going to win the game for you, but there's certainly something that impacts winning and losing. I think in my game around Eindhoven, they were particularly useful at that point, and I think delayed the Allies significantly, so that they really couldn't get going at any point in the game after, say, the first 2 turns. The traffic markers were very useful. So yeah, that's my likes, and I say I do like the game in general as well. I think it's got a lot going for it, and it is a recommended portrayal of Operation Market Garden, certainly. So what do I dislike about it? Well, I think the first thing is when I mentioned that it's a one mapper, and there were it was nice and concise. I think it's also slightly too concise in a way, in that there's really only 2 scenarios in the game, both of which start with the air landings, and one finishes after turn 11 and one finishes right at the end of turn 20. I mean, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with that, but certainly as far as things like introductory scenarios, etc., or particular scenarios built around the landing zones of particular divisions, or maybe a scenario concerning 30 Corps and the 101st, maybe an 82nd as well, where 30 Corps is a reinforcement which is timed historically, something like that, and certainly for 1st Airborne Division, you could do a little scenario in a little map space. I would have thought that'd be quite useful actually, but you kind of have to dive into the game. There was effectively zero rules differences between the two scenarios. It's just how long you go on and what the victory conditions are. So I think that kind of differential would have been it would be a bit more attractive. I think it's a shame that it's not there really. So yeah, slightly a bit too concise in that way. One thing that kind of puzzled me really was the idea of limited remnant markers. So remnants are the third step of a three-step unit. So when it's full strength, it's on its full strength side. Loses a step, it's on its reduced side on the back of the counter, and then when it loses again, it's replaced by a remnant marker. Now, and that's nothing wrong with that at all. That seemed quite good, except there's actually a limitation to the number of remnants. So the idea is that remnants come on board and they represent the units that's been damaged, and you could rebuild it and things like that, back up to 1 or 2 steps away from the remnant. But the idea is that if you lose that remnant, that's one of a limited amount. And so, for example, with the 1st Airborne, you've got 4 remnants available. Now, there's certainly with sort of like the 82nd as well. I was getting very, very low on remnants, so that if you get another unit which loses its 2nd step, the idea is you don't replace it with a remnant. You would put a replacement on the replacement track, so you could add it to another unit. Now, I don't see really why there's a differential there. It kind of looks like, well, we didn't just put enough counters in. I can't quite see why that restriction is there for any particular historical reason. Is it possible that there's units started to fall apart faster once several units had taken excessive casualties? I don't know. It just seemed odd to have put that in. I don't see what it's there for, other than kind of saving counters. I found it very odd that it wasn't really particularly relevant in my game, although I was getting very close to it, as I said, with the 82nd. But I'm quite sure what that's about really, in sort of historical and game terms. The next thing to mention on dislikes is the amount of states or modes that units can get in. We've got the 2 main ones, which is disrupted and full retreat. Completely understand those. But you've also got the scattered, the spent, and the engaged. And the spent is almost not a mode. It's just a way of getting units infiltrated past other units, and seems to be just about not allowed to do combat. Sort of like there's another state called Auto DS, which is like an overrun state. It's kind of similar to that. You've got the scattered, which is for the airborne units when they land, and engage, which is a result of the combat tables, which gives you the unit effectively has difficulty withdrawing from the where it's in on its movement turn. I don't know if the subtle differences between all these is it's quite it's quite bitty. It's quite finicky. I think it possibly maybe worth centering more things around disruption as opposed to having these other states which get you're cleaning them up after in the recovery phase, and sometimes you miss the counters, and particularly the engaged on the German side, they're almost the same colour as the German counters in a lot of cases, so you can kind of miss it. I kind of understand why they're there, but I just feel that there's these very small extra states that a unit might be in that just seem it could have been done in a much more concise way, which a lot of the rest of the game has been done successfully. This seems a little bit to have run away a bit with it, and could have been a lot tighter, I think, on that. That's the unit states. Also on this was the idea of the lead formation. So it was the idea of you have to declare not a lead unit but a lead formation, as in, is it a particular, is it the 82nd Division, or is it 30 Corps, or is it the Vendetta group, or is it the Eastern group or the Western group for the Germans, etc. Meaning that when you mixed up units, then you would get some halving happening. But you were able to attach one a different unit to an attack by other units. Again, I think it was a bit all overwrought, actually. I'm not sure how much it adds to things. It was particularly with regards to the 101st and 30 Corps, getting those units to interact. Eventually I kind of just almost ignored it and just halved the other units anyway, because it doesn't prohibit the other units from getting involved. The whole lead formation thing, I didn't know, it just felt a bit heavy and a bit annoying, and I didn't really get too much out of it as a thing. I don't know if it really did what it was meant to do, I think, and it's again slightly inelegant, and halving not halving, and you have one unit, but it is fine, but not two, and they have to be stacked, but core units don't have to be stacked. It was a little bit bitty again. I'm not sure there was a huge amount of effect other than just being a bit annoying when you were moving bits and pieces around and trying to do combat. So yeah, I'm not sure about the lead formation as it is. So the last thing which I quite understand really is that engineers can ferry vehicle units across major rivers, but they can't ferry vehicle units across minor rivers or canals. And it specifically seems to say that, and I don't know why. A smaller river is a block to an engineer unit ferrying units across. I don't know, maybe it's a game thing or something, but I mean, particularly with regard to minor rivers, and I'll come on to that with observations, because I think they're really quite important in this game. They really do get in the way, especially with the idea of 30 Corps anyway, certainly vehicle units. But I didn't quite understand why engineers could ferry vehicle units across a major river but not a minor or a canal. Just don't understand that. Is the equipment too bulky or something? I'm not sure. So I don't know why there's that restriction there. And it would have been very useful at points for 30 Corps to be able to ferry vehicle units across these other waterways. But there were restrictions. See, that's another dislike. And as you can see, these dislikes are not major things. They're sort of little sort of things I made notes of as going through and thinking, don't get that. I'm not sure I agree with that. they're not major aspects of the game. So it might be a bit of little bit of nitpicking, I suppose, but I like the game in its total anyway. So the criticisms will be fairly minor anyway. But these are the things that I've picked up on dislikes. Moving on to observations. So I think the first thing to note is certainly in the game I play, which is what I'm trying to do with observations here, what I thought of the actual game as it was played, etc. I think the critical thing in the entire battle, I think, was that first hex in Eindhoven. I found that hex to be really significant. Right here, where there was able to be a Fallschirmjäger unit here, along with the flat gun, and that really kind of really gummed up the works, and that really took about 3, possibly even 4 turns for Eindhoven to be cleared, which is almost half the game. As you can see, so over a third of the game, certainly, and that's really significant. I think that really shoved the timetable very awry, and I think there was nothing really that happened in the game that was quite had the same effect there. I think. The thing that got me with it actually was this concept of the minor rivers. I mentioned that in the dislikes briefly then. So minor rivers in the game actually come across as the same as major rivers. However, they've got unblowable bridges. So when there's a road going across a minor river, say like here, you can't blow that bridge, so that's permanent. That's what it seems to be, because certainly with vehicle units, and accepted with the airborne units, because it's all leg, and the German units, which are mostly leg, this is not significant. But certainly for the idea of 30 core, which is kind of the main thrust of the game, if 30 core doesn't get on with it, it doesn't matter how well the airborne units have really done or not done. As you can see in this game, the first Airborne did very well. Probably, potentially could still be in control of the bridge at the end of the game here. It was with their deployment. But with regards to vehicles, if you look at the Eindhoven hex, just removing the traffic marker here, we have these 2 minor rivers here. Now, vehicle units can't cross unless there's a road across. So the place to cross this river is here and up here, and then for this river is down there across this marsh. Now, if you can't get vehicle units across effectively, and once they're across, they have to, there's a certain amount of, certainly to the south, there's a certain amount of convoluted travel you have to do to get to a useful position. This means that effectively the vehicle units, and I'll use one example, are stuck, only deployed on that hex. Now 30 core has got an overabundance of vehicle units, so with the stacking rules you can only get the 2 units here to attack that hex, and everything else has to be infantry, and all it needs is a well placed traffic marker, and you can't get around to cover these hexes here to attack that hex. It's kind of a 1 hex attack almost, and I think that's a big thing of what allowed Eindhoven to hold in my game. It's the actual minor rivers here held up the Allied advance, because getting vehicle units across here and down was a hell of a struggle. I mean, 11th Armoured eventually came to clear these here, and it might be that I didn't appreciate this in my approach to Eindhoven, and so if we look further south, you know, the importance of maybe this road, the importance of this road didn't become stark until I actually tried to take Eindhoven. Now, in the case of there not being much into Eindhoven when you reach there, then, you know, maybe it's not so much of a problem. But certainly in my game, those minor rivers made a big problem with the with 34 actually getting through Eindhoven, more than almost any other thing really. That was almost an extra traffic jam, if you see what I mean, an extra pile up, never mind the traffic markers. So yeah, I think that's a major observation I got from the game as far as the play of it goes. So I think if the Germans can actually get useful units to that hex of Eindhoven, I think it's quite a powerful hex to stop 30 core, or to at least delay it enough so that it becomes academic as regards, you know, sort of winning the game. That's not to say in this game, if I was running the full 20 turns, it's possible that 30 core could actually get to Arnhem in this game. I'm not going to be running it through, but it's going to be a fight for Nijmegen. But there's a possibility that could happen, depending on things like weather, etc. And you know, and the German reinforcements that's still to come. So yeah, I think, as I say, my first observation, I think that hex is actually a critical hex there. So the other thing was, and I'll shift the focus here across to our two isolated airborne areas. So yeah, here we go. So what the strategy I had for this game was that both the 82nd and the 1st should go for the bridges, as in don't care about anything else, almost go for the bridges. Now I think for the 1st Airborne, I think it worked quite well. We're able to push back the SS unit here that holds the advance up, and we got enough weight onto that attack while ignoring what was going on in the forest here and the drop zones particularly. And what that enabled to happen is a lot of units to get into the city and to set up a perimeter. Now, certainly what then suffered was the drop zones. So, but I don't think in actuality that was a huge problem for the Allies or for the 1st Airborne. I don't think losing those drop zones are as critical as it looks. I think that position, that sort of turn 2 position, is the kind of the be all and end all of 1st Airborne. Now, contrast that with 82nd, where I think historically there was a delay on getting to the bridges. I thought, well, I'm going to try and counteract that maybe and get again 82nd Airborne to run to the bridges and try and get them. Now, interestingly enough, they failed, but there was a couple of chances for them to get in. But I think the loss of the drop zones, or the danger to the drop zones, was much more significant to 82nd. And the security of that meant that the 82nd, because it's got to hold more than not just the Nijmegen bridge, but the bridges over here and the Grave bridge as well, is that this shrinking of the area due to the pressure applied by the 406 division and the other units, I think wasn't a good idea. So I think the game as is, I'm not sure I'd advise going for the bridges on the 82nd, because it may fare out worse than what happened to me even. And yeah, so when eventually we got reinforcements, we brought them in over here rather than down here. And there isn't really a proper line here. There's the towns on this end, but other than that, it's just woods. So there isn't a line to defend. Whereas further up here, if you're able to hold this line here, even though there's not much to defend, you've still got the town there, and you restrict the movement of the German units around this area. Whereas now, once you have that road, you can switch your angle of attack a lot easier. It's a lot more flexible for the Germans. So I'd say for the 1st Airborne, going for the bridges is a good idea. I think the 82nd, I don't think it's a good idea, certainly. Regarding the 101st, I think possibly I didn't leap across the canal and go and help Eindhoven, the 30 Corps in Eindhoven, quick enough. But I think they kind of did okay, and it just took such an age for them to be relieved, and such a lot of units started to come in. But for the Germans, it's difficult for them. So I don't think there was anything particularly unusual about the 101st, I think, in this game. The next observation it's almost like a like, actually, really, is that what I've found is that the way the map is coloured, and also the counters are coloured, it's actually very clear. You can actually really see where the counters are, where they're on the map, and what the terrain is around them. The colour scheme is very good, particularly I think in low light. So some of the videos I wasn't really lighting it very well, but they came through quite well on the camera, and I was able to see. And I'm starting to get old eyes, and a lot of games I play, we have to really turn up the intensity of the light to be able to work with the map and the counters. And this, I didn't really have that problem with this. So I think kudos to the artwork as far as functionality as in gameplay goes. I think it really sort of stars in this arena, and it was a particular thing I observed, in that I could play the game in not the best lighting conditions quite successfully. Particularly, I mentioned this already, is that the Allies, I think, are far tougher to play than the Germans. I think the Germans can make mistakes and survive, whereas the Allies have things have to go right. They can go wrong occasionally, but certainly not several times in a row. And this is particularly to do with 30 Corps. Playing the 1st and the 82nd, you're kind of doing one, maybe two jobs here, whereas with 30 Corps, and even the 101st, I suppose, it's quite tough because you've got a timetable, and if you miss that timetable, then it's not going to get any better. You've lost that initiative, and you're starting to try and sprint to come back, and then the mistakes, and if you haven't got the units in the right place and stuff. So the German player can actually use that lack of time very successfully. I think in some cases I made mistakes with the Germans. I think I didn't play the 107 Panzer Brigade very well, but it kind of didn't matter. And I think in this game, because of Eindhoven and the difficulties there, once they came on, the 107 Panzer Brigade kind of weren't even necessary. So I was doing things I probably shouldn't have done with them, sort of sent them far too forward and unsupported. But you could do it because of the situation in the game. So I think if you're playing this game and there's an uneven level of experience. Certainly, the most experienced players should be on the Allied side, not the German side, and the least experienced on the German side. I think that's very clear as a piece of advice and an observation of the game. And I think suppose that's how it should be, really. It's not a criticism; it's just as an observation. So and going on to the general observation, as I've said a few times now, you're probably bored with it, but I do like the game. I like it. I like its format and most things about it, and the fact that they're able to cram so much onto one map. It's quite impressive. I think in comparison to other marker gun games I've seen and played, it's the smallest I've seen, but not necessarily the least rich in the gaming experience. Actually, there's a lot here to commend and to enjoy, and I think as a two-player experience, having only soloed it, I think it would be a tense fight and an engaged fight. I say with players being involved in each other's turns to a significant extent. So anyway, that's my review, Raven Rant about Holland'44 Operation Market Garden. So kudos to Mark Simonich for the game and GMT for publishing it. It's certainly going to be replayed by me. Maybe I can find an opponent on that as well. It's quite a good, maybe a weekend game, something like that. Certainly, or a very very long day game. For the short game, maybe a weekend for the long one. It'll be quite welcome back on the table. But anyway, for now, I've got to look forward to the next playthrough. So I have just actually received the Gallipoli 1915 Churchill Greatest Gamble game from GMT just come through. Just been delivered to the through the post box. So I'll be looking at that, and that's quite a heavier game than either this game or Metz before. There's a lot more to it. It's a lot more intricate, and I'll look at that and see whether it's kind of suitable for a playthrough like I'm trying to do with a video, or if not, how I change the format of doing a video and including a game like that. But it is bigger and it's more intricate and it's very much higher complexity. I'll be looking at that, and then hopefully you'll be subscribing to the channel and with a notification, and when I get to the next playthrough, you'll be notified, and hopefully I'll be able to talk to you then. So again, thanks for watching again through quite a long series of videos. Hope it's been entertaining, possibly educational, possibly useful for your time invested, and thanks very much for sticking through it. And I'll see you next time. Bye for now.